This is Jamie Myers of Sabbath Assembly, and you're listening to Toilet of Hell.
You're listening to 66.6 FM, Radio TOVH, The Flush.
This is the Toilet of Hell Radio Show. I'm Joe Thrashenkill. 365 Days of Horrors with me as always. We've got a really great guest on, and I think we're stuck in a rut, man. We gotta like mix it up, go to a key party or something. So on this show, we actually do have a really sorry. The idea of going to a key party with you is just really tickling me right now.
So do we take a car together, or don't we have to take separate cars? Because we're gonna leave with someone else.
Oh, I thought you. Maybe I have some messed up ideas about what a key party actually is. We gotta consult a swinging expert on the show.
Wait! A bunch of people go to a party. They put their keys inside a whatever candy dish or something.
Yeah.
Someone else pulls out a key, and you go leave with them, and you bang.
Well, I thought maybe like if you went as a couple, you came in one car and then like you traded off with the couple that draws your key.
I think we're both far too young to be talking about key parties, which haven't been a thing since the late 70s.
I'm telling you, like there is some like super manicured suburb like just outside of Utah where they fucking get down on key parties every Saturday night.
Oh, I thoroughly believe it. I'm sure that's probably why there's a run on mayonnaise the night before in town.
Gross. I don't know what brought any of this up, but we actually have a really great guest on the show today. Jamie from Sabbath Assembly comes by and talks to us about, everything. Like we talk about literally everything. We figured out that we both lived in the same shithole Texas town for a long while. It's a really cool interview. So after the break, we're going to go ahead and have her on. For now, though, we've got other things to talk about. So I don't put much, faith in album sales in 2017 because, album sales aren't really indicative of anything other than the number of people that are willing to buy your CD for some reason. But there's news about album sales. How about you kick this one off for us?
So our very, very good friend Phil Labonte and his band, All That Remains Is, recently put out their new album, their 8th album actually, which blows my mind already. The album's called Madness.
I've heard
it sold
Safe Place from it. Safe Space. Yeah.
Safe Space, yes. And the album sold only 9,700 units in its first week.
Now, I am not any kind of expert in album sales, but it seems like that's not a very good amount, especially for a band that has very clear inclinations for mainstream success, including those auto-tuned clean vocals.
Yeah, in comparison, their 2015 album, The Order of Things, sold 19,000 during the first week.
Ooh, that's bad.
Yeah, it's didn't he recently say that the band was like beyond metal or moved on from metal or something like that?
Yeah, you just forgot to tell his audience, I guess. But I mean, yeah, they're alienating what audience they did have before by making it even more. I don't know. I hate to say like something that would denote masculinity because that's more his game, but it's pussified music. There we go.
Initially they were a straightforward metalcore band, The Fall of Ideals or The Deepest Gray, serviceable metalcore. It was what it was. It was fine, and he clearly made this conscious effort to become more accessible over each album, and I think with this one it's just obviously, like I said, the auto-tune, clean vocals, clean chorus, clearly trying to tap in somewhat to that five-finger death punch. We're totally aggressive, but we're still catchy and you could sing along with our simple lyrics. And it's just, as of right now, it's failing pretty miserably. Just for people's comparison of sales, Dope, remember the band Dope, the new metal band?
Yeah, the guy with the pederast guitarist.
Yes, that would be Trip Eason, who is definitely no longer in the band, in Dope's defense. They sold 15,000 copies in the first week for their album that came out in 2016. I think it's called Blood Money.
Was that record new metal like previous Dope records?
New metal core-ish, but more or less. I mean, the same. You're not getting much different stuff from a band like Dope. I think what helped them is that they went away for a while. Like they say in wrestling, we can't miss you if you never go away. It's kind of the same thing. All that remains is never really gone away. They keep churning out, softer and softer albums every 2 years, and this is kind of the end result of it.
Well, I mean, I don't know how relatable it is hearing a 42-year-old man sing through auto-tune about Ron Paul and his wife leaving him.
Well, you don't want to hear about the gold standard?
Yeah, man. Just get this fiat shit out of here. So I don't.
Nothing gets the kids more excited than free markets.
Yeah, I hear that libertarianism is the new punk rock, according to dipshit libertarians on Twitter. So, by that same
They're
token,
the real rebels.
Yeah, it's transgressive to the point that you can't sell 10,000 records.
In All That Remains' defense, this album did sell better than both Suicide Silence's album and Immure.
So, I think that Suicide Silence, I didn't listen to this record just as I've never listened to any other Suicide Silence record because I don't care. It seems like they caught a lot of flack for going after a more mainstream sound with clean vocals and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I
mean, it was just such a drastic change from a band that I guess people see as one of the forefathers of deathcore.
Yeah, I mean, I have heard Suicide Silence songs in the past, and they kind of sounded just like a jumble of fucking riffs, without anything really, I don't know, especially catchy going on. So I can see how that would possibly alienate your audience. I don't know what the deal with the Immure is because I don't, huff glue. So did they change their sound as well?
It's all the same to me. I think their latest album actually did better than the previous one, and I think the sales are somewhat comparable to All That Remains. But it's aggro, Neanderthal, punch you in the back of the head, whatever.
Watch you suck his dick music.
Yeah, a lot of dick sucking watching music, and I guess that's good enough for 8,000 sales in the first week.
We should invite Frankie Palmieri to our key party. I have no transition from this at all.
Now I just want to see what his key ring looks like. Does it just have a little vape pen attached to it? Is there a little Nintendo Mario figure attached to it?
I'm guessing
now
it's
curious.
Mini brass knuckles,
Oh yeah, definitely.
So, on an entirely different note, because I don't know how to get out of this quagmire, I was checking out metalsucks.net, this little startup site that most folks probably haven't heard of. They had this story today that I thought was pretty fascinating. This band from Arizona emailed Axl to tell them their story, and it's fucked up, man. Did you read this?
I did. I felt so bad for this band. I've never heard of them before. They're called Scylla, and I'm just, a lot of us who have been in bands and are musicians have not gone through something similar, but kind of always get our hopes up and we're going to play for this show and then it's going to happen. We're going to get on this tour and then it's going to happen. And they just lost a ton of money over this.
Yeah, man. As I was reading through this email, it was just a slow motion car collision happening. There's nothing that you can do about it.
Yeah, it's like seeing an accident is gonna happen, and you want to yell, but you can't, and then it's too late.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it was. So, okay, I guess we should probably get into the actual content of the email here, but I say this. I'm not judging this band for what happened, especially for having poor judgment. It's just I don't know, band dudes. They get, like you said, they get their hopes up because it's a difficult business to make $1 in, let alone enough to feed yourself. I mean, you're constantly trying to get better gigs, to get more listeners, and you hope that finally you hit that breaking point where people know your name, where you can actually fill up a show when you announce a show. I mean, you're working for this goal, and it just seems like it's impossible. You play shows where nobody attends. I mean, you lose Facebook followers as we do sometimes. So when you see an opportunity, you wanna jump on it for full force, and unfortunately that means that a lot of people are out there to take advantage of you. I mean, I've talked about this with Brennicide and a number of other small, starting musicians, but there are a number of shady labels out there that are willing to take a lot of money from you as a small metal musician in return for about 30 minutes of work that you can do on your own.
Personally, there's a label, I won't say who they are, but I mean, we have covered some of their bands in the past. They were interested in my band, and they wanted something like €1,000 to print out the album, which is absurd and ridiculous, and we didn't do it.
Yeah, and I wonder if we're talking about the same label right now.
This was a European label.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about too. Are they Polish?
I don't think so. I think they might have been Italian.
Okay, so there are, good to know there are lots of people out there that are going to take you for your money given the opportunity. Let's go ahead and get into this. I'm going to read out a bit of this email. This is from Arizona's Scylla. We've been friends for the last few years with a man named Redacted. He goes by Redacted on his Facebook account, which is now inactive due to recent events. He has come out to Arizona on multiple occasions to see us perform and had us out to El Paso to play. He has never given us a reason not to trust him. Back in January, we were contacted by him. He mentioned tours with bands like Trivium and Periphery and wanting to invest in our group, and also expressed wanting to manage us. Not long after, he contacted us about several more tour offers and also mentioned there being a $1,500 buy-in for said tours. This time he was offering us dates on the last Suicide Silence tour, the Carry the Flame tour, and more tours to include Warped Tour. So he said there was money. The money that we gave him was refundable, and that he was going to cover the rest of the buy-in costs as his good faith investment with us. We were excited about the offers and felt there was no reason not to trust him, considering our relationship thus far. We agreed and quickly got him the money he requested. Weeks later, Redacted sent us a contact from his alleged company, claiming to be working with the Circle Talent Agency as well as Victory Records to book us on these tours. We signed the contract, and we were all in agreement for these tours, which included promises of a minimum of $1,500 a day guarantee. Because of this, we all quit our jobs and started restocking our merch, making van repairs, and basically spending a lot of money and draining our savings to prepare to be on tour for most of the year, as was promised to us. We made this guy very aware of all this, and he only encouraged us and motivated us for the upcoming tours. In said contract, we were advised we'd be announcing our tours on February 13th. That date came, and he had no promotional material. First red flag. He kept advising us it was underway, and after another week, still nothing. Mind you, the tour was supposed to start the following week now. That week comes, and nothing. He claims the agency he was working with wanted to change our agreement, leading us to being dropped. He assured us more dates for the same time frame being booked, though not to worry, and we trusted him. March starts to pass, and less contact from him, and still nothing. Mind you, by this point, we've all been unemployed for about a month now. This keeps going on. It keeps going on. He hears, occasionally from him that he's got something lined up, and then nothing. In the meantime, these guys, 3, 4, 5 people, I don't know how many are in this band, are unemployed, waiting on this tour that basically just never comes. They're draining every dollar they have, waiting to be on Warped Tour or with Suicide Silence or one of these things. It's nothing. The guy took their $1,500 and ran. Most people aren't as forthcoming about this, but it happens.
Yeah, it's really heartbreaking. And I just hope other young bands can see this and at least have the foresight to think ahead a little bit, to not be so naive, to, if there's a contract, have a lawyer look at it, ask someone older than you, ask an adult, ask your parent, ask someone who has some idea of how the world works, and just kind of get perspective on what's going on. Like, I know it's exciting, the possibility of going on a world tour, playing with a band you love, and just playing in front of more than 20 people on any given night. But I mean, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah. And what kills me about this is this promoter guy. He said that he had known this guy for a couple of years. He was working on this grift for a long fucking time. So, I mean, yeah. The odds are real good that this was not the only band that he was doing this to.
Yeah.
So
it's really unfortunate.
Yeah, and we talked about it with Carly from Candiria, because he was on Victory Records. I've talked about this with one of the guys in the Facebook group that used to be in a wildly popular band from Victory Records. That you have to have a lawyer read the contract, otherwise all the power in this situation is on the person making the contract, and you can get eternally boned.
Yep. I mean, there's bands out there that have signed contracts where their music is just not theirs anymore for the rest of their life. Some random person, paid a small amount of money, and they own your work. Your art is now in the hands of someone else, and you can never repress the album. You can never re-record a song. You can never, in some cases, you can never perform it live because it's not yours anymore, because you didn't have someone read the thing you signed.
Yeah. So read over what you're signing. Also, maybe just don't do music. It's a real quagmire, man. Like, there's very little money in it. People trying to fuck you all the time. Groupies don't really exist, at least not in my experience.
Well, if people don't do music, then we'd have nothing to complain about on the show.
We would go full on like talk radio. The Democrats in this country. Sorry.
Into hour 2 of Key Party Etiquette.
Oh, yeah, there you Exactly. Hey, that reminds me, I don't know why this reminds me of this, but it does. And I meant to mention this earlier in the show, but I was talking with the bro from Axe Slasher. He was telling me that rating and reviewing podcasts gives it way more juice within the iTunes ecosystem than just like straight listens. So theoretically, like, you could be on the top charts if you have just a super dedicated listener base who, every one of them rates and reviews you highly. Just throwing that out there. That was just something that I learned about yesterday, and I felt I should, put out into the universe, see what happens.
Yeah, the more people rate and comment, the higher it gets pushed up the iTunes charts, so more people see it. The more people who listen to the show, the better the show becomes. Simple as that.
And we might be able to buy some better equipment. That'd be awesome. Let's go ahead and let's play a track from the new record from Sabbath Assembly. We're going to come back and talk with Jamie, the vocalist of that band, and she's going to blow your mind.
Just out of reach. Intuition. An inward arc. A mirror reflects the sun, and I am blinded. Hatred is a hammer beating.
and we have a very special guest on, Jamie Myers of Sabbath Assembly. Jamie, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
You know, you've got a brand new record coming out soon, Rites of Passage, and I wanted to ask you, because I'm looking at the cover art right now, is that you painted in ceremonial garb?
Why, yes, it is.
That is dope. I think that's how you know you've made it successfully as a musician, when somebody paints you like as a priestess. How did that artwork come about?
I came across the work of Pacific Northwest artist Alex Rice-Farr, and was just absolutely blown away by it. And through a brief series of conversations, I kind of pitched the idea of like, hey, we've got this new album, and the narrative is really strong. It's really going to take an artist with a strong aesthetic, a strong narrative quality in their own right to capture some of these themes. And I briefly explained to him the idea of just having this sort of seer who was kind of having all these things morphing in and around her, and he just grabbed hold of that idea and took it so far beyond anything that I could have imagined. It was like a daydream inside my head, and he just, I can't say enough good things about working with him on a whole, and we're very, very pleased with the outcome and just the journey throughout the whole bit. So yeah, very, very excited about that.
Is it weird to kind of be the front and center image for the new album?
Yeah, I mean, definitely there's always that trepidation of, do you want your face being out there? But I think in this context, what he did with it was so telling and so just downright creepy, and just sort of, you know, it just has a darkness to it, and this sort of, I actually have the painting itself, and the eyes sort of follow you around the room. So I think if anything, it's odd to see my face staring back at me through the eyes of someone else that painted it. But as far as being on there, I think what he did really encapsulates the feelings behind a lot of these songs. And so I think if it were any other way, or the artwork had not been successful, then we really could have had a hiccup there. But his work is otherworldly. So yeah, in this case, I'm pretty stoked about it.
That's awesome. Well, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about this record, the meat of it, inside of it. What is the overarching theme of the Rites of Passage? Well,
generally in society, we are told that we're going to experience certain ceremonies of birth, childhood, social puberty, betrothal, marriage, pregnancy, parenthood, as well as just the general initiation into religious societies. And then, of course, you have death, so a funeral, if you will. But I think as society grows, and with each decade and century past, we've sort of gotten away from a lot of those traditions. And so we started out to write about each of those social aspects of growth. However, somewhere along the way, we kind of realized that we were writing about our own lives. And so we started to kind of internalize each ceremony of human passage and the rites occasioned by, for instance, atonement, the dawn of anger, onset of dementia, and each one of those and how it correlates to a song. So, for instance, the onset of dementia being Angels' Trumpets, or the dissolution of relationship being Does Love Die? The song Twilight of God sort of represents soul corruption, and I Must Be Gone more like a betrayal of trust, or Bride of Darkness being lament. So as we've kind of had our own journeys through life, and we started being a little more introspective, you start to kind of go through some of those on your own terms, and coming out the other side of them, just as native musicians and artists, have had our own rite of passage, if you will.
Beyond the personal rites of passage, to also reflect kind of where Sabbath Assembly is now as a band?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the sound of Sabbath Assembly has really changed over the years, and a lot of that has based on where we've been in the group and who we've had in the room with us. And originally on the Year of Gods album, when I came into the fold, we were still in this sort of project territory of like, okay, here is this group of hymns that we're going to explore and we're going to reinterpret and put ourselves into it. And so then as we started to play this material more often in a live capacity, we had different incarnations of the group and who was present. And so a lot of that was just, I kind of viewed the group as an artist collective, if you will, of musicians and what have you. But I think as we neared the end of the Process Church material and what we wanted to have done with it, we moved on to the self-titled album. And once that happened, Kevin Huffnagel and Dave Nuss and myself were already working together throughout all of those albums. However, once we started thinking in terms of self-titled material, we brought in Johnny DeBlase, who plays bass, and he's just phenomenal. He kind of solidified the group, and suddenly it took it out of that project form and really made a band out of us. And we started, though some of the themes were still in correlation with the old material, we were suddenly revitalized, and sort of, that was carried on into the Rites of Passage when we were like, well, where do we go from here? And we had some tours under our belt, but at that point, Ron Verode came into that. He's playing second guitar on the album. And then it just felt like family. There was a certain camaraderie and a sick sense of humor that we all had. And it was pretty great and hard to deny. So, yeah, we definitely went through our own maturing and our own rites of passage and just sort of chewing up these ideas and spitting them back out and really redeveloping who we were as a band.
So in the process of putting together these rites and these explorations into each of these, say, like, as you mentioned, the journey through dementia, is that a process that's coming from a single person in the band putting it together and then putting it out for everybody else to hear, or are you working on this together and putting your own views into it?
Well, we have a pretty good system in place for trading melodies, ideas, and demoing things. And when it comes to the conceptual end of stuff, Dave and I kind of take the forefront on that. And we have a lot of discussions, as well as with the group, but like, how does this music make us feel? What do we want to do with it? And maybe the first song that kind of came of the album, which was Does Love Die, didn't really spell that out for us all too well in the beginning. But as we started dealing with certain lyrical themes, we were like, kind of looking at our personal lives and not to just jump on that old 2016 bandwagon of how much it sucked, but on personal terms, it was a rough year for a lot of people. And Dave and I are both parents, and so we're kind of going through the phases of watching our children grow, and at the same time, we're all seeing our parents age. And so before we knew it, the life kind of the album took a life of its own. And suddenly this narrative was really just too strong to ignore. And that's kind of how some of the thoughts were evoked. But Angel's Trumpet in particular, in dealing with dementia, it's not that either of us are experiencing that per se, thankfully not yet, hopefully not ever. But just in that, dealing with the age of your parents getting up there, it is a common theme for many people in adulthood. So the Datura flower, which is used in a lot of puberty rites, is actually said to be used in rituals to help bridge the journey to adulthood by causing the forgetful moment of one's childhood so that you can progress on to the next phase. So in some ways, it's about the young and the old, and kind of how we fold that back into the songs. So, yeah, it's definitely got some personal roots, I'd say.
That's interesting, and themes that I can't say I've heard explored very often, particularly in heavier music. There's definitely a more adult perspective coming at this. So you mentioned that you have children. How old? How many do you have?
I have one son. His name is Errol, and he's 11 years old.
So how does he feel about his mom like being a rock and roller? Does he think it's awesome?
I'll have to ask him when he's my age, and he's had some time to process it. In all honesty, I think there's parts of it that he thinks cool, but he's sort of indifferent right now. There were times when he was younger that I would be sitting playing bass or practicing the songs or doing something, and I'm always singing around the house. I'll catch him humming a melody or two, so I definitely know it's seeped into his subconscious on some level. While I certainly don't ram it down his throat. I came from a musical household. My dad was always playing, and whereas I may have been too busy in my own kiddo world to really pay attention, it had a profound effect on me. So it wouldn't surprise me in some way, shape, or form if he had a touch of that himself when he gets older. But again, I'm not trying to influence him too heavy in that because I want him to be his own personal, but I certainly don't hide any of it from him.
That's awesome. That is very cool. You mentioned your own childhood growing up and learning a little bit about music that way. What kind of music was played in the house?
Oh man, I grew up in the 70s, so definitely a lot of King Crimson, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, had a lot of Moody Blues and ELO. My mom was really big into Heart, so was my dad, so definitely a lot of that kind of stuff, as well as just things from his younger childhood that was a little more in the soul influence or old school rock and roll, Elvis Presley type stuff. So it was very varied, as well as old country, outlaw country. That's definitely been an influence in my life for some time now. So he had a pretty diverse record collection that I pilfered when I left home.
You're cool. Based in Texas right now, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Hey, me
so
too.
I'm the Yankee meat and this Texas sandwich right now.
Yeah. What part of Texas you from, Joe?
Originally, I'm from a tiny little town just outside of the DFW area, but I've been in Austin for the last 12 years now.
Try me. I'm in DFW.
Ennis, Texas.
Oh, shit, shut up. I went to high school in Ennis for a brief moment.
Seriously? That's crazy.
Seriously.
There's not much
graduating class are you?
2005, I think.
You're just a babe.
You say that, I'm 30.
Hey, I won't tell you how old I am. We'll talk about that when you're not recording.
Good idea.
So since you're based in Texas and the rest of the band is based in New York, does that make recording process easier or harder?
With this group, it makes it, sure, I'd love to be around them every week and in a rehearsal room, don't get me wrong, but in some ways I think it helps. Thankfully, everybody is at a really high caliber of productivity, and their creativeness really knows no bounds. So in some ways it's better because we're not burnt out. Having been in bands for 20 plus years, it just seems like, you can get in that stale routine where you meet up every week and eventually somebody starts coming and life gets in the way. And the next thing you know, you're like, oh, where's so-and-so? And they didn't make it to practice, or they don't have their band rent and all that crap that tends to go on in bands. With everybody being a little further away, somebody gets a spark of imagination, captures it in demo form, sends it on to the next person, and then we layer. Technology being what it is these days, there's no excuses for not being productive. And once we have a few of these under our belt, we tend to fly people to Texas, or Dave and Dave's down in Corpus right now, we might fly up to New York, and then we just lock ourselves in a room for a weekend and have these really intensive rehearsals. But they're super productive. And so by the time we come out again, we're like, okay, that's what we like about this one, or let's cut that part out. We sort of trim the fat, if you will. And then we re-demo everything. And then that's what we take as our skeleton once we go into studio form.
Speaking of being productive, this is going to be your third album in about 4 years. I guess the process must really help churning out albums.
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever been a part of a band that's been as productive in that sense. I feel very, very fortunate, and I often hear from other people that, oh God, we released an album 4 years ago and you just can't get into the studio, or how long it takes. And there's nothing wrong with taking your time, by all means. Sometimes it's very purposeful that you take that long in between albums. But with this group, we're just really not getting any younger. So we just all have this sort of fire lit under our asses. And so we're just riding it while it lasts, and constantly pushing ourselves and coming up with new and inventive ways to stay creative and stay productive with one another. And I think it's just been so fun that, we keep doing it.
In keeping with that fire, you just finished up a small run of shows. How did those go?
Oh, that was great. I can't tell you how awesome it was to watch Dysrhythmia for several nights in a row. Those guys are truly have honed their craft, and sometimes it's just really hard to wrap your head around what they're doing. It's so technical. And so to see that in person and to see their energy on stage, as well as getting to see Kevin perform from an audience perspective, is really a treat for me, because I find myself standing in the audience grinning like an idiot, like, oh, that's my brother up there. Rad, So that was a lot of fun.
And speaking of like the distance between members, and Kevin's in Dysrhythmia and Gorguts, Ron is in KO Dot and Psalm Zero. Do you think there's ever going to be an extensive, full-blown Sabbath Assembly tour in the future?
Well, that is the question, my friend. We certainly want to do that. I do hope it's in the cards, and a lot of that just comes from the right timing and opportunity. I mean, as we all know, there's not a lot of money in being in a band, and we don't really expect to make money. However, we do and are kind of at that where we at least want to break even. So, and being in different cities, we're definitely constantly hearing of little moments of like, yeah, maybe we should try to get on that festival and whatnot. So, I hope that that's in the cards for us. It's certainly something that we're looking to do more of. We did last summer with the Northwestern band Atriarch, and that was just killer. I mean, another just absolutely stellar band. And then the summer before that, we were fortunate enough to hit the road with Christian Mistress for a brief stint. So, anybody got offers out there, just send them our way, because we're always looking for stuff.
How did you connect with Ron, by the way? You've got a personal connection. Jordan is good buddies with Ron.
Yeah, BFFs since elementary school.
Yeah, I did quiz him on some of the things you mentioned via email form. But Ron came into the group through Kevin. When we toured with Christian Mistress, and then the next go round, we had this lovely, lovely friend of ours, Eva Vaughn, who also plays in Dead to a Dying World. She had also done some recording for us, just a super, super talented young lady. She had gone on that tour with us, and she had some things coming up with Dead to a Dying World that didn't, timing-wise, quite line up with future shows that we had. So it sort of left a hole, and we were like, okay, so what are we going to do with that? And Kevin was like, well, I'd really like to maybe, if Eva can't do it, let's bring somebody on board guitar wise. And so we had a show coming up, which was the Martyrdom Fest up in New York. And he's like, I know this kid, he's really good. I think he'd be enthusiastic, and I think he would be a good fit with our personalities. And so, we were like, sure, man, when Kevin Huffnagel says, hey, I got this guy, you listen. And so we get up there and we go in to rehearse, and, I'm thinking, gosh, how's this going to go? We've got this short amount of time, and we're going to practically play a show the next day. And man, Ron did his homework. He learned his sheet music. He came into that rehearsal on fire and slayed. So he sort of, it might have been an informal audition of sorts, and he was kind of throwing us a bone by filling in for this show. But then in terms, we all had such a great time that it was like, hey, let's keep him on board. And then the writing process for Rites of Passage started to begin, and then it was just off, to the races. So that's kind of how he came into the group.
When you do live shows, do you have a preference if you want to play with similar bands like Occultation or a band like Just in the Ancient Ones, or do you want to try to hit different genres and reach different audiences?
We would never turn down opportunities to work with similarly themed bands. That being said, I grew up in a crusty punk rock scene in the early 90s, and that was just sort of like, especially being in Texas, people are hungry just for a fucking place to play, let alone having a show. And so you would just get these really diverse bills of prog. One band might be noise, the next band might be metal, and those made for some of the most kick-ass shows because everything was in the same vein, but they were all different enough that you kind of bring a piece of your own audience and get them all in the same room together, and there's this energy that can't be denied. So on a personal level, as a show goer, I love a diverse bill. Also as someone who plays shows, because 9 times out of 10, you're going to have somebody who came to see the opener or the last band and doesn't know anything about you and comes up to you afterwards and is like, man, that was cool. I had no idea. And you can tend to only get that with some diversity.
I'm happy to hear that there were shows in the 90s in Texas that weren't all Pantera shows.
Oh, good Lord, Pantera's from Fort Worth. I've heard my fair share of that crap. But, yeah, I mean, I went to high school with dudes in tight pants where you could see their brush mark on the back of where they carried their brush around, where it had made an indentation in their back pocket, constantly combing their hair in the hallway. So, no, not to knock Pantera. That's some hometown heroes for a lot of people around here. I don't want to get beat up the next time I go out. But, yeah, that being said, I think a lot of us at that time, even kids who were growing up and really into metal, were also sort of picked on in school by certain types of metalheads or jocks or what have you. So, you find your subgenre, your fellow brethren, if you will, to attend shows and be in a scene with. And thankfully, when I was younger, there were a lot of little bit older kids. One guy in particular named Jack Conroe that was really on the forefront of DIY venues and putting stuff together, and really made a place for all us kids who weren't old enough to get into bars, have a place to just go let loose and have these kind of cathartic moments of letting loose to music.
I would like you to name drop one or two of your favorite, maybe forgotten bands from Texas from that era.
Just right off the top of my head, Yeti is always been up there. Yeti actually is one of the members of now currently Pinkish Black. He's the drummer, old-time friend of mine that I've known since I was a teenager. His bands, my old bands, have always kind of played on bills together. They were awesome. Pointy Shoe Factory is another one that we would play with a lot. And Darren Beck's actually the singer of that band and the singer of Pinkish Black. So the Gonzalez brothers out in Dallas have been part of old band called Acolyte and have been doing crazy jazz stuff with their father. So, it's a very incestuous scene around here, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
That's awesome. I'd never heard of Pointy Shoe Factory in my life, so I feel like I have to check this out right now.
Yeah, go check out that weirdness. It's good times for sure. And I mean, there's a million other bands. Slave One, Garuda, Bread and Water. There's just so many out there that were great. If any of my friends are listening, don't get butthurt that I left you out. I'm just old. I'm old and I can't remember anything.
It's just a little bit different. I mean, like, past a certain point in time, there's less of an online presence. So some of these bands have kind of gotten swept in the tide of time. There's not an easy way to seek out the material. So I'm always interested in trying to find some of these things and learning a little bit more about the past.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really glad the internet didn't exist back then, but at the same time, for that reason of posterity and record keeping, I'm sad that some of it still doesn't exist. And when you do find an old VHS tape, you got to go convert it. I'm sitting on a cache of them, but I'm just too lazy to go do anything about it. But yeah, a lot of these bands didn't press vinyl, or maybe they did, and like you said, or maybe it was the now newly popular again cassette tape. That was your format back then. And
yeah, what do you make of that coming back into popularity?
I think it's cool for the kids, but me personally, I don't even own a cassette deck anymore. I remember the days of having pen pals and sitting and recording a record to cassette tape and making mixtapes and then trading them with some friends I had out in Oakland. One of my friends, Jeff from Asunder, would constantly be trading tapes back and forth, and that took a lot of effort. That whole instantaneous information at your fingertips didn't exist, but you were hungry, you wanted it more, and it also made you appreciate it more when you had a gem of a band that you'd never heard of fall in your lap. So I think it's great. There'll be some tangible moment, because really is all this internet business, it's so plentiful, it starts to get lost too. So maybe having something in old analog, tangible form is good for people.
Like you said earlier, I know there's been a shift in themes for the band, but in the past, there's been a heavy influence with the occult, the process church, Satan. Have fans ever sent you anything weird, like Eye of Nude or perhaps Goat's Blood?
Not to my knowledge. I try to keep my contact via where somebody would send me that, anonymous. That being said, we have had some strange encounters here and there. You're always going to get a potential weirdo now and again at a show. We have had some interaction with some people that were directly involved with the Process Church in the 60s and 70s, and that was very interesting. And there was a gentleman by the name of Robert Taylor who came to one of my very first shows with Sabbath Assembly that was up in the woods in the Northwest, and he saw our set. So he was around in the coffee shops. He wasn't, or from his story, the way he told it, he wasn't directly affiliated with them, but he had been to their a couple of this or that meetings in the coffee shop that they ran, and he had heard some of these hymns, and when he heard them all these years later, he said, that, and actually Darren Beck was involved in that show, and he and I were harmonizing, and he was just like, I'm hearing these harmonies and I'm hearing all this music with this new life, and at one point I soared out of my body. So that was really a full circle and kind of fun moment to hear. And then we've also been reached out by one particular person who said, "Oh, you're doing it wrong. These songs weren't meant to be this dark, and they weren't meant to be, and to which our response was, well, you're supposed to pick your own path, and this is how we interpret them." And in fact, if you go back and listen to the Quaternity album and you listen to the beginning of the track Lucifer, there's a shoddily sort of recorded moment that is actually that said member sending us a phone recording recording of the hymn Lucifer.
Wow.
And so that's a little tidbit there that some people don't know.
Yeah, musicians don't normally want to hear from their audience that they're doing something wrong, but at least you got something good out of it.
Oh, no, I mean, I welcome it. I mean, none of us wear our hearts on our sleeves, and who are we to say we were doing anything right? You know, who was he to say? He didn't write any of that stuff personally. And at the beginning of the project, you know, David kind of gone into this with Timothy Wiley's blessing, who was a founding member of the church. So we weren't too concerned about offending anyone because in that regard, but it made for a very interesting moment and story.
Did you grow up in any kind of religious environment?
I vaguely remember waves of that throughout certain parts of life. Growing up partially in Texas for the first maybe 5 years of my life. If you're anywhere below a certain state line, you're generally going to be born into a Southern Baptist family.
True.
My parents weren't devout Christians by any means, though I do briefly recall them going through a slightly religious point when they had first had my brother and I. But that quickly went out the door in their late 20s and 30s, and then I can remember them being very we lived all over the world, and I think when you live in different cities and countries, and to that point, they, you know, had grown up in Texas themselves. I think it's really hard to travel the world and see different cultures and be a part of different people's stories and have such a narrow focus. So I think more people should get out there and travel and see the world and realize that their way isn't the only way. But to answer your question, the brief moments, you know, but overall, no, not so much.
Same kind of deal. Grew up in Texas in a really religious environment, but I will say that at least I learned a little bit about music through the Baptist church. You know, harmonies and sacred harp singing. Like, I can't do any of that. But,
sure.
It's a pretty rich musical tradition, at least.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, you know, Dave did come from a very devout family. And so, you know, if you talk to him sometime, you'll have to get his story out of it. But yeah, I mean, not that there aren't, you listen to old soul and gospel music, there's some really rich and beautiful moments that are very heartfelt. And one thing that I can generally appreciate something about most genres of music. So I get where you're coming from. It's enough to make an impression on you, at least, good or bad. But the music, at least, is usually always very uplifting.
Are snake handlers still a thing in Texas?
Oh, yeah.
I
It still exists all through the parts of the South, I think.
I feel like that's an unexplored genre. You know, everyone does war metal now, or, you know, talking about religion, stuff like that. How about snake handling? That seems like an untapped market.
I think speaking in tongues in particular has real potential because I'm too lazy to write lyrics anyway. So tongues is the way to go.
Yeah, I'd go to a basement show to see someone speak in tongues about snake handling. I think that's something to think about.
I don't know if they were talking about snake handling, but certainly speaking in tongues. That was the Diamanda concert I went to a couple weeks ago. That was insane. But no, in all seriousness, you might be onto something there.
I'm going to trademark it now.
Is there anything that you would like our listeners to know that maybe we haven't touched on that about the new record or about your band in particular, about your life?
Sure. Just that the album is actually officially released tomorrow. There's going to be some more creative stuff coming down the pipe just shortly after that. We've been fortunate enough to work with another New York artist. Her name is Gretchen Heinel. She's really young and absolutely brilliant. She's a photographer / filmmaker. She does a lot of videos for certain bands, and she just has this really raw and insane aesthetic to her work, and I was immediately attracted to it and had been sort of courting her off and on for some time now, wanting to work with her, and recently pitched an idea for a short film, and she took it and ran with it and created this really rich, beautiful narrative based off of this brief idea that I sent her way, and she really harnessed a lot of intensity in it, and we're actually scoring the music for it. We also look forward to future artistic endeavors with Alex Ricefar. He not only does a lot of wonderful paintings, but is also quite good at sculpture and special effects, makeup, and this and that. And so we're got some irons in the fire with him as well moving forward. So we don't have any intention of slowing down. And even though this album's just recently coming out, we are currently writing the next one too. So
you guys don't
busy. The rock don't stop.
Thanks to everyone for listening. Thanks to Jamie from Sabbath Assembly for the great interview. Their album Rites of Passage is out on May 12th via Svart Records. I've listened to the whole thing. It is absolutely awesome. I think you're really going to love it. Definitely check them out if they come to your town on tour. You can follow us online at Toilet of Hell. Follow Joe at Joe Thrash and Kill. Follow me at 365 Days of Horror. Make sure to like and comment and rate on iTunes. It really helps us out a lot. Make sure to like us on Facebook and join the Facebook group. You got anything else for us, Joe?
Yeah, if you go to a key party, invite me.
Jingle, jingle. We'll see you next week.
Later, everyone.
You're listening to 66.6 FM, Radio TOVH, The Flush.